I gotta tell you guys, that was probably one of the greatest combat sports weekends of all time. Now, why do I say that? Well, first of all, you gotta understand that some classics you will never get back. I'll give you an example. Right now, today, as you're seeing me in another car ride video, right? I'm in a different car. I'm in a 2016 as opposed to a 22 that you usually saw me in. And what's significant about that is the difference between the 22 and this 2016 car is that this 2016 car actually has a CD player. And the newer cars, maybe somewhere in the 2020s, 21s, and the one that I have, the 22, guess what? You don't have a CD player anymore, right? You remember back in the days when you used to think about buying a CD or buying an album that everybody promoted in the industry, like, oh man, All Eyes on Me is about to come out. Notorious B.I.G. Ready to Die is about to come out. Jay-Z's Blueprint 1 and 2 and 3 and Volume whatever, The Life of Sean Carter Volume this and that is about to come out, right? There's this great anticipation. Korn, Limp Bizkit, what type of era had CDs? Let's say Everlast, and then Sublime. All these great music in the 1990s. Whitney Houston, just to name a few. They all required CDs if you wanted to listen to them, and then the iPod era came, and then that was that. So why that's significant is because you got to understand a classic only comes once in a lifetime, and maybe even just never again within that once in a lifetime frame that I just mentioned. So are we ever going to have CD players in our cars in the modern day, especially with the new electronic cars and especially with the new cars that they're coming out with Bluetooth attachments where your iPhone is literally the absolute everything and end-all be-all of everything that you do, whether it's apps that you watch, ESPN, UFC, sports, soccer, basketball, or watching YouTube, which is the more common thing that a lot of people use as a media outlet or a media consumption in today's market. But nonetheless, what you saw in this weekend with Spence and Crawford and in UFC 291 was exactly a classic that you'll never get back, just like what I said with the CD thing, right? You remember the CDs back in the days, they came with a little pamphlet of some sort and information with credits of the people that were involved, notes of artists, lyrics, or just random pictures that led up to the promotion of the album. Those days you'll never get back. Nowadays, new music comes out, you got to go order it on Apple and Music and whatnot. The new pay-per-view comes out, guess what? You're going to have to go watch it on an app of some sort. And if you're one of these people that used one of these boxes back in the days, guess what? You're going to have to learn and adapt. And that's the reality of today's boxing and combat sports in the metaphorical sense. So I got to tell you, like, as frustrating as boxing can be, especially from an MMA fan's perspective, where you get all the best fights year in and year out, especially if you watch the UFC, right? And also all mixed martial arts altogether basically tries to put on the best fights possible in the most competitive fashion where nobody's protecting anybody. And in boxing, you rarely get that. You constantly get all these tune-up matches, these fights where you know that the other guy is going to win, no 50-50 fights. You know the outcome of the fight because of the skill differentiation between one fighter to another. So guess what? It's not that exciting. It's not that compelling. But if you're a hardcore fan and you're an observer of the sport, or if you even train the sport of boxing, guess what? You're going to be interested in it. But for the rest of the world that's not a combat sports fan or anything like that, they're just not really going to care unless it's a big fight. Now, in this particular generation, I think we are in an era where these big fights are happening. You had Tank Davis taking on Ryan Garcia, finally putting it all on the line. Now you had Crawford and Spence putting it all on the line. Will Tyson Fury put it all on the line to unify an undisputed championship with none other than Alexander Usyk after the Francis Ngannou fight, perhaps. Maybe that's in the works. If not, then obviously we know where Tyson stands in an era where most men were out there putting it all out in the line, and then he becomes one of these guys that has never done it. Everybody is becoming undisputed in the boxing world. You have Josh Taylor at 140. Now you got Terrence Crawford at 147. You got Charlo at 154. Then you got Canelo undisputed at 168. And then you got, Usyk was undisputed at cruiserweight. So we're getting all these guys that are getting undisputed statuses. Inoue is right up there. So all these guys, they are doing exactly what boxing is known for in its glam days, constantly bringing out the best fights. And sometimes you got to go through all these horrible fights for you to wait for a great anticipation like you got with Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence. Now, no shame in Errol Spence losing that fight. He is still one of the top fighters in the world, and time will tell with Terrence Crawford in the performances that he's going to have in the future. He's going to have even more blown out matches with less than competition than Errol Spence, and you're going to see that, and it's only going to elevate Errol Spence in the status of him being the number 2 of this current generation at the 147 division. So there's no shame in that. On the UFC side, what you got going on is the constant consistency of great cards, great fights, competitive architecture that that particular organization has brought for mixed martial arts. Once again, I said, there is no holding hand, there is no easy fights, there are no tune-up fights, just 50-50 fights, and let's find out who the best is. And if you fall and you fail in these big fights, guess what? You're going to be rewarded later on with an even bigger career, with an even lucrative career. What's a great example of that in boxing? Take Carl Froch. He took on all the best fighters that he could. He took on none other than Andre Ward. Wasn't successful, but guess what? He finished off his career with a great fight in Wembley Stadium and in soccer stadiums against George Groves, and made millions upon millions, probably even more than Andre Ward after their Super 6 Series fight that they had going on. So that is what fighting sports is all about. However, in the Mayweather era of being undefeated, in which he has influenced fighters such as Tyson Fury to sort of take the route that he did, and you can make of that as you will. You could call that cowardice, you could call that smart, you could call that methodical, you could call that boring as a casual combat sports fan. But nonetheless, while Tyson is taking non-calculated or calculated risks, rather, the rest of the boxing world is not doing that. They're following the consistency of what we've always seen in mixed martial arts in the UFC. And that's what you had going on with Justin Gaethje and Dustin Poirier. Obviously, we know that Dustin Poirier got the better of them in the first fight, getting a TKO in the 4th round, and then on top of that, now getting knocked out himself in the 2nd round. That's what this sport is about, just like what he just mentioned in the Ariel Helwani show today. He mentioned something to the effect, you know what? Me and Conor, he beat me the first time. I had to wait a couple of years to get that back. Now, I got better. I evolved. I became a better fighter. I got wrestling underneath me. My boxing got better. I became a lot more methodical, a lot more sharp. And not only sharp, but also very emotionally stable in the way that he has to handle being stoic in a world of craziness and madness, in which he has to mitigate all that, in which he has to control these high emotions and these high lows and high highs and low lows and high lows and everything in between that goes with the emotional roller coaster of being a mixed martial arts fighter. And then he comes back and beats Conor twice. That's the name of the game. That's what you do. You don't shun people for losing or saying, oh, he's done, it's over for him, or this and that. With Spence Jr., guess what? In his next fight, he could very well blow out his next opponent and just show us why exactly him and Terrence Crawford a number 1 and number 2 guy in the world. But to end all that, Terrence Crawford is undoubtedly the best boxer, pound for pound, in the world today. Above Inoue, above Canelo, above Tyson Fury, until Tyson Fury decides to take tougher competition. But for now, he's taking the money route in taking on Francis Ngannou, and you can blame him. But nonetheless, this is one of the greatest eras of combat sports for 2 reasons. Number 1, because not only are you getting all the competitive architecture that needs to happen in fights, the championship fights, the mandatories, whether that would be in the UFC or boxing, but you're also getting the freak show fights like Jake Paul versus Nate Diaz that's going on next week, or this week for that matter. And then you have Tyson Fury taking on Francis Ngannou. But on top of that, then you have Stipe Miocic, one of the most defending heavyweights of all time, meaning he had the most title defenses as a heavyweight, is now taking on John Jones, whom many people consider to be the GOAT after he picked up his 2nd championship as a heavyweight undisputed champion in the UFC. Then you have that fight going on. Then you have Sean O'Malley taking on Funk Master Aljo in Boston. You got a guy who's got this hype, and then you got a guy who wants to prove himself to be a champion because of how lackluster he got to the title, and then having to prove himself to the rival in which they thought he was lackluster because of the disqualification from the Yan fight. And now he has a chance to do that against a fan favorite in Boston. And by the way, even though Aljo is an East Coast guy, Boston is an Irish fan base, or an Irish American fan base, and who is more Irish American than none other than Sean O'Malley? Some will argue maybe he's an African brother with Mike Perry and Dricus du Plessis, but nonetheless, he's a Boston guy. And guess what? He's going to be the heavy favorite in that particular fight. So just imagine what would happen if Aljo was to win. These are the type of exciting matchups that you're seeing right now in boxing and MMA. So now we got the 147, 154, 168. Canelo's fighting everybody. Then you got Tyson Fury. We're all waiting on him to fight Usyk to just finally put that missing piece into the undisputed championship of the heavyweight division. And then after that, you could say that